One meme, 4 letters, and a trade war that keeps punching the border economy in the face, even when the president backs down. I'm talking about Taco Trump, or Trump always chickens out, the Wall Street nickname for a president who loves to threaten brutal tariffs, watch markets panic, and then quietly walk away from his own threats. But here's the thing no one tells you. Even when Trump doesn't follow through, the damage is already done, especially for Canada. Because every threat freezes investment, rattles exporters, and makes businesses think twice about hiring people whose jobs depend on cross-border trade. And the Canada case is the perfect example. Today on Huge Press Room, we're unpacking how Trump's Canada tariffs really work, where the taco nickname came from, and why chickening out still hurts factories, truckers, and workers on both sides of the border. If you're into deep dives on Trump, Canada, and the real economics behind the headlines, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. On February 1st, 2025, Trump signed executive orders slapping an extra 25% tariff on almost all imports from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on imports from China. Canadian energy got a slightly lower rate, only a 10% tariff. He didn't do this through normal USMCA trade rules. He used emergency powers, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, declaring that Canada's failure to do more about fentanyl and illegal drugs was an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. In plain language, we think you're not doing enough on fentanyl, so we're taxing almost everything you sell us. By March 4th, those tariffs were in force. 25% on most Canadian goods, 25% on most Canadian goods, 10% on energy, hitting everything from steel to farm products to manufactured goods. For Canada, that's not a minor annoyance. Around 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the US, and 25% blanket tariffs are like a tax on the entire Canadian economy. So where does taco come in? The taco nickname, Trump always chickens out, exploded in 2025. It started on Wall Street, where traders noticed a pattern. Trump announces some extreme tariff move, markets tank, and then he quietly delays, shrinks, or forgets about half of it. Financial Times columnists started talking about the taco trade. You buy stocks after Trump's threat crashes them, then sell when he backs off and markets bounce. The acronym went viral. Trump always chickens out. Trump hates it. At a press conference in May, a CNBC reporter asked him what he thought about Wall Street calling him taco. He snapped back that it was a nasty question, insisted he wasn't chickening out at all, and said it was just negotiation. But look at the record and you see why the name stuck. He has repeatedly announced bigger tariffs than the ones he actually implemented. He set deadlines, then extended or watered them down at the last minute. He's threatened brutal new hits on allies, including Canada, and then simply not filed the paperwork. Which brings us to one of the clearest taco Trump moments of this trade war. The extra 10% tariff he swore he'd slap on Canada, and then just never did. You probably remember the Reagan TV ad drama. In October 2025, Ontario Premier Doug Ford paid roughly 75 million Canadian dollars for a TV campaign using edited clips from Ronald Reagan's 1987 speech warning that tariffs cause trade wars and economic disaster. The ad ran during the World Series. Reagan's voice basically said, "When someone says, let's impose tariffs, it looks patriotic. But over the long run, trade barriers hurt every worker and consumer and trigger trade wars." Trump went ballistic. He accused Canada of running a fraudulent ad that misrepresented Reagan, said it was designed to interfere with the U.S. Supreme Court case over his tariffs, and wrote on Truth Social, "Based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated." Then he added the line that made Canadian exporters' blood run cold. "Because of their serious misrepresentation of the facts, I am increasing the tariff on Canada by 10% over and above what they are paying now." Do the math. If most Canadian goods are already paying 35% because of earlier fentanyl tariff hikes, another 10% would take them to around 45% duty at the border. Auto parts, lumber, machinery, huge chunks of Canada's export economy, suddenly didn't know if they'd still be competitive in 4 weeks. Canadian companies braced for impact. Auto suppliers in particular panicked because car parts cross the border multiple times before a vehicle is finished. Even one extra 10% round trip can wipe out a profit margin. And then, nothing happened. Almost a month later, reporters from Politico and The Independent checked. No notice in the Federal Register, no guidance to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, no change in the actual tariff rate being collected at the border. A U.S. official quietly admitted the administration had decided to hold off on the additional tariffs and continue to dangle the threat in future talks. In other words, Trump got the headlines, the outrage, and the tough on Canada image, but never followed through on the extra 10%. That's pure taco. Talk big, shake markets, scare businesses, then quietly step back without ever officially changing the law. And yet, for people living around the border, it still felt like a punch in the face. Because the damage of a tariff threat doesn't only come when customs officers start collecting more money. It starts the moment businesses believe the threat might be real. Picture this from a Canadian company's point of view. You run an auto parts manufacturer in Windsor or Oshawa. Your components cross the US-Canada border 3, 4, maybe 5 times before ending up in a finished car in Michigan or Ohio. You've already absorbed a 25% tariff on most exports and 35% on some, blamed on fentanyl and migration. Now the US president announces on social media that trade talks with your country are terminated. Tariffs are going up another 10 percentage points. Your entire business model may be about to melt down. What do? You freeze hiring, delay expansion plans, hold off on buying new equipment. Tell your bank you might need flexibility on loans if the extra tariff hits. Even if that 10% never shows up in official regulations, the uncertainty has already strangled growth. That's exactly what Canadian industry groups reported. Auto manufacturers, parts suppliers, and cross-border logistics firms told journalists they were in wait-and-see mode because one signature in Washington could suddenly make their business unprofitable. And it's not just Canadian companies. U.S. importers who rely on Canadian inputs for cars, steel, food, lumber also have to decide, do we sign long-term contracts, build new capacity in border states, or sit on our hands because we have no idea what price we'll be paying a month from now? An official told Politico that the White House deliberately kept the threat alive while holding off officially, using it as a bargaining chip. In game theory, that's called weaponizing uncertainty. In human terms, it's called messing with people's jobs. So when people call him Taco Trump, Trump always chickens out. They don't mean he's harmless. They mean he uses the threat of tariffs as a weapon just as much as the tariffs themselves. Look at the pattern. In February, he announces sweeping tariffs on Canada and Mexico, then pauses them for a month after getting some concessions, then lets them go ahead anyway. In multiple fights with China and Europe, he floats insane numbers: 60%, 100%, 145%, and then settles for something lower after spooking markets. With Canada, he threatens an extra 10% hike after the Reagan ad, but never actually files the documentation. From a distance, it looks like a guy who chickens out. Up close, it looks like a guy who's discovered that threats alone can move markets, scare allies, and win headlines, whether or not he ever follows through. And Canada is stuck in the middle of that strategy. For Mark Carney, this taco pattern is actually part of the reason he's trying to drag Canada out of dependence on the US altogether. Every time Trump announces a new tariff pauses, it threatens an increase, fails to implement it. Carney points at the chaos and says, this is exactly why Canada needs to double non-US exports and build a pipeline to Asia. We can't keep living in a world where one man's tweets decide whether our factories invest or not. So in a strange way, Taco Trump is fueling Carney's argument at home. The nickname is meant as an insult, that Trump always chickens out. But for Carney and for Canadian businesses, the problem isn't that he backs down. The problem is that he keeps playing with the gun. Every time he waves it around, even if he never pulls the trigger fully, people flinch, investors hold their breath, and the Canada-US border economy gets just a little weaker, a little more nervous, a little less willing to risk money on long-term projects. So what do we do with this? Is Trump's taco pattern actually a good thing? Because sometimes he doesn't carry out his worst threats? Or is it even more dangerous? Because no one can plan, no one can trust, and the fear becomes a permanent part of doing business with the United States? For Canadians living near the border, workers in auto plants, truckers hauling parts back and forth, small companies exporting lumber or food, the distinction doesn't matter. You don't need a tariff to hit 45% for your life to be unstable. You just need to wake up every morning wondering if today is the day it finally does. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Taco Trump is less dangerous because he always chickens out? Or more dangerous because he's turned uncertainty itself into a weapon? And what should Canada do about it? Lean even harder into pipelines, Asia, and diversification? Or keep trying to manage the chaos and hope the next White House is more predictable? If you want to see how this fits into the bigger picture, check out our other videos here on Huge Press Room, Carney's Pipeline Revolt, how Canada is trying to escape Trump's tariff trap with a Pacific pipeline, the Reagan ad that made Trump terminate all trade talks, the story behind the fraudulent commercial that set this whole thing on fire. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Trump versus Canada. Thanks for watching Huge Press Room. I'll see you in the next one.